Welcome back. It's time to finish up this animation. We still need to set up the camera and the lights and create some more assets to fill our scene, as well as creating some camera movement to follow our character. I'll show some tips I found for good Blender outputs, and then we'll put everything through ComfyUI again for a final polish. This video is out a bit later than I wanted. I've been a bit preoccupied with creating a submission for the product Odyssey competition. If you have not already, check out their website. Even if you don't plan to compete, the files that they have for the 3D animation category are an excellent resource to practice with. Go ahead and download them, and you can use them in the same way that we're going to be using our Blender outputs, but you don't have to do any work for them. Go ahead and download them. Try it out. Have some fun. If you like what you've created, go ahead and submit it. Show the world what you can do. Anyways, let's get back to our bunny warrior animation. Picking up from where we left off in Blender with our cleaned up mocap animation, first let's frame the shot and set up our camera. We're going to be using a camera rig. It's not quite as simple to use as a basic camera, but it's going to give us more control. So we're going to go to Blender add-ons and search for camera, or just cam, and add camera rigs. We'll be adding a basic camera rig, so just go back into our scene, add, and basic camera rig. For my camera rig, I also added these two empties to control the depth pass, and we'll look at that later. Set your frame that you want. I like a 9x16. Select the rig and enter into pose mode. And we're gonna move the camera into a good position. And it helps to have a split screen so I can see both the camera view and look at my rig. Now we just need to grab this target bone and place it roughly where our character is and give us a decent view. Now if we hit play, we can see that our character goes off frame quickly, and we'll fix that now. What we want is our camera target to follow our character so it doesn't go off frame as our character starts his animation. I like things to be automated, so to make things easier, we are going to add a bone constraint. Let's select our target bone here and add a copy location bone constraint. And we're going to select the character rig as the target with the hip bone as the bone that will follow. To make it a bit smoother, we can disable the Z influence. That way it only travels on a flat XY plane and it does not jump up and down. So now no matter where our character goes, the camera will follow him. And because the kick still goes a bit off frame here, we can add a bit more camera animation to our root bone. And we just want our root bone to pan over slightly and keep this leg in frame. I found that anything that's next to the frame will get a bit distorted in the AI, so we're going to try to avoid that. And then finally, we can just pan back over so we get a good final shot of our character. Now that I'm happy with the camera, it's time to fill the scene with background elements. I generated the background models the same way I did the character. But I did these in Midjourney because it was faster, and I'm not too particular about the details here. Just want some snow-covered ground, rocks, and trees. I scaled and moved the models around the scene until I'm happy with the results. And finally, I will look at the whole scene and I'll scrub through the animation, looking for things that the AI will struggle with, like pieces of cut-off geometry, the end of the ground, a floating tree, a tree that's not in the ground. As long as everything looks roughly believable, that's it, and we're good. Now let's jump over to the compositing tab so I can show you how my camera rig affects the depth output and my setup for getting good line and mask outputs. Let's start with depth. If you've ever set up a depth pass before in Blender, you know that it's kind of difficult to set up the min and the max values. And that's where these empties come in. So we're going to use the Y location, the local Y location of these to drive the min and the max values. That way when we set up our depth range, it's visual and it's more intuitive. Shout out to ToyXYZ as he posted a video showing how to set this up, and I'll likely talk about his rig actually later in one of my videos. So give a follow to him on Twitter if you would like some tips about AI He's got some good processes here on how to use these tools. Because our character is very non-human, I want to stay away from OpenPose here. It tends to add some character features that are more human, so that's not what we want here. So we're going to stay away from OpenPose. As you see, if I move this empty closer or farther away, it affects the depth, so it's easy to see the bounds of our scene, and we can tweak those as we need. Next is this crazy node setup that I found on Blender Stackexchange. Freestyle is nice, but it's got a problem. It's easy to set up, but I'll switch over to this raft scene to show you a demonstration. As you can see here, the freestyle, there's no lines in between these two pieces of geometry where they meet. That's not a problem for our current model. He's really just a big blob, but other models, that's not what we want. We want to be able to see the line in between here, and that's where we're going to get our best result. So this solves that by comparing the difference between the normal and the depth maps and to find sharp changes. I don't really understand myself how it works, but you can check out that. There's a link in the description. The important thing is it works, and most of the time it looks much better than the freestyle output. Finally, the masks. This is how I set up my masks in Blender. Rather than sending out the crypto pick, which has a bunch of funky colors on it that I have to pick out, we can actually use Blender to create our masks that we want for us. It can be separate objects, separate materials, or by parenting. All we have to do is have one frame rendered out, and then we can pick whatever we want inside of the rendered output. So we can group similar items even if they're different objects with different materials, like the grouped ground and rocks that I have here. So I could group all the background items and just one item for the character, or I could separate a mask out for each item if I wanted to. The best part is we can export a transparent PNG of the color render, and that can double as a mask as well as an image that we can use as input for a ControlNet or IP adapter. For me, I want one group for all the trees, so they are parented under an empty, and the ground and rocks are also, and then there's just the character by himself. With all that done, set your output paths in the composite nodes as well as the property panel and render everything out. I suggest you render out a few frames and just stop everything and check, make sure that everything looks good, and then you can render out the whole thing. Once our rough animation is rendered out, we can go back over to ComfyUI. I'll go over each section of the workflow and describe what they do. Then I'll discuss some tips I use to get good results without too many AI artifacts. To start with, there is the input section. This is where the main footage goes, and I placed a simple static background behind to fill the sky with as I rendered everything out as a transparent PNG. So anywhere where there wasn't geometry, it was just a blank space. So the next section here is the parameters, and this is all the settings for everything like the seed, the checkpoint, the frames, and above that we have the masks. And as I said, you can export the transparent images sequence, and then we're just going to use the inverse of that as our mask from the load images path node. The next section here is for all the prompting, and I've set these up in the same way that Matteo showcased in his video, the ComfyUI Advanced Understanding Part 2. We have condition set mask for each area based on the masks from the mask section before. Then there's the final conditioning for the whole composition. Combined, they are the Voltron we need to control the whole results like a pro. Next up is ControlNet. I only used Control GIF and the depth map. The depth map is masked to just the character alone. I intended to use the depth for the trees as well, but the background looked a bit better without, so the depth is not applied. Then there's the IP adapter and the first animate diff pass. I can just squeeze all of this into my 12GB 3060, so if you have less VRAM, You're going to have to lower both your expectations and the resolutions, or use less control net, something to lower your VRAM usage. From here, I bypass everything from the first pass, and I restart ComfyUI to reset the VRAM. I have a reset button down here from easy use nodes, but for the final upscale, I just want to guarantee that I've cleared all the memory. I also switch models here from the previous. The model that I use in the first pass is nice looking, but it's a bit rough, and I want to clean up this last pass. All the models I use are custom mixed. I will talk more about that in another video, but basically I'm just using merge and save nodes. On the merge node here, 1 is 100% of the bottom input, and 0 is 100% of the top input. I think that's a bit confusing, so I usually just wire them in reverse and think about it that way. I test until I'm happy and then just use the save node. After I switch models, I load the last output from the first pass into the VHS by path node, and then I run this and the final interpolation at the end. I want to circle back here to the prompts in the IP adapter. I'm using a few tricks here to get some better results. Here is a result from before I made these changes. I'm sure you can see the problem here. The poor little bunny broke his neck trying to remain looking at me the whole time. I added some prompt scheduling, and this definitely helped in my tests, just not quite enough. IP adapter is just way too overpowering, especially at the strength that I'm using. I needed a way to tell IP adapter to back down just on those frames where the character turned around. I reached out to Mateo, the developer of IP adapter nodes on Discord, to see if the weight scheduling trick that he showcased could work for that. He helped me figure out what I needed, and I created some custom weights to reduce the strength on the frames where we should see the back of his head. That did the trick. No more eyes on the back of his head. Yay! Some things I would like to change are using 2 images for the IP adapter, one for the back of the character, and then swap the weights between those instead of just decrease on the one. Secondly, I'd like to use SubUp, or the super badass upscaler, at the end here to get a higher resolution output. And finally, using an animated sequence for that background instead of just a static image. That's it for now. Don't forget to check out Project Odyssey and download those contest materials and make something to show the world. Have fun. Hope you enjoyed the video. Everything I mentioned here should have links below in the description. Put some comments and let me know what you think. What else would you like to see me make videos on in the future? And of course, if you have any questions. This is Arc2Res. Thanks for watching, and stick around. I have a lot more planned for future videos. Bye-bye.